5 true scary Christmas horror stories for a cold winter night. December always brought a festive air to our quiet suburban street. Twinkling lights adorned front porches, and glowing decorations filled windows. My neighbors, the Harts, always outdid themselves with a large, beautifully lit Christmas wreath hanging on their front door. It was the centerpiece of their home, its soft, inviting glow casting warm light across the snowy lawn. It started on the first cold evening of December. As I took out the trash after dusk, I noticed something unusual, a figure standing still just beneath the heart's wreath. At first, I assumed it was a holiday decoration. They'd added perhaps some sort of life-sized Santa or festive mannequin. But something about it felt wrong. Its shape was too thin, its posture too rigid. The light from the wreath cast strange shadows across its hunched form. I shook my head, blaming the dim light and winter fatigue, and went back inside. The next evening, it was there again. Same spot, same stiff stance. But now, its coat, a long, dark garment, seemed dirtier, stained in places where the light hit it just right. My chest tightened. The Harts hadn't mentioned any new decorations, and I was sure I hadn't seen anything like it in previous years. I tried to dismiss it as an odd prank, or perhaps something they put out just for fun. A week passed. Each night, just as dusk fell, the figure would reappear, always standing under the wreath. It never moved. Not once. Its presence felt oppressive, an eerie constant against the cheerful holiday lights. One particularly cold night, curiosity got the best of me. I waited until I saw the figure appear, then grabbed a flashlight and walked across the street. As I approached the Hart's front yard, I felt the air grow colder. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I neared the front door. The figure was gone. I spun around, searching the yard, but there was nothing but silent, snow-covered ground. The only thing out of place was a strange patch of dark slush near the front steps, as though someone or something had stood there for hours. The smell was faint, but unmistakable, damp and earthy, like something old and forgotten. Embarrassed at my overreaction, I hurried home. But that night, sleep didn't come easily. The following evening, the figure was back closer this time, standing just a few feet from the Hart's door. I could see its distorted outline more clearly now. Its coat was ragged, hanging like torn fabric, and dark stains spread across its front. I couldn't see a face, just the hood pulled low. It didn't seem possible that the Harts hadn't noticed it by now, but they still acted normally, leaving for work, bringing in groceries, completely unaware of the thing standing in their yard every evening. By Christmas Eve, I was on edge. I stayed up late, watching through a gap in my curtains. The street was still, covered in thick, untouched snow. Midnight came and went. Finally, I forced myself to bed, though unease weighed on me like a heavy blanket. Sometime deep in the night, I woke to a faint scraping sound. My breath hitched. The sound was coming from my front door, slow, deliberate, like someone dragging something heavy across the wooden surface. Heart pounding, I crept down the stairs, avoiding the creaky spots I knew too well. The scraping continued steady, persistent. My fingers hovered over the door handle, trembling. I didn't dare unlock it. Suddenly, the sound stopped. Dead silence. I stood frozen, ears straining, but there was nothing but the whisper of wind outside. Slowly, I backed away, locking every door and window in the house. Whatever had made that sound was gone. For now. The next morning, I awoke to a sharp knock on the door. Not the heavy, dragging sound from before, but a crisp, urgent rap. It was the police. "Did you hear or see anything unusual last night?" an officer asked, his face grim. I shook my head, my mind racing. "The hearts are missing," he continued. "Their door was wide open when a delivery driver came by this morning." I followed him outside, dreading what I might see. The Hart's front yard was untouched, but their beloved Christmas wreath was torn apart, hanging in shredded pieces from its hook. Scattered across the snow were bits of dark fabric and something worse, faint, discolored stains, half hidden by fresh snowfall. Feeling sick, I turned back toward my own house. My heart nearly stopped. There, just outside my front porch, lay a small pile of ragged burlap and matted fabric. A faint, damp smell of decay clung to the air, cold and earthy. The December wind stirred the remnants, shifting them slightly. Behind me, the officer called for backup, but I couldn't look away from the dark stains burned into the snow. The Harts were gone. Their wreath was destroyed, and whatever had come for them had been at my door last night. The scent still lingered along with the memory of that slow, scraping sound. Story 2. Winter arrived harshly that December, covering our little town in thick blankets of snow. The holiday lights twinkled from rooftops, and glowing decorations lined porches. My home stood at the edge of the woods, isolated but peaceful, a perfect place to spend quiet, snowy evenings by the fire. One late evening, as I was locking up for the night, I glanced out the living room window and saw someone standing at the end of my front yard, just beyond the iron gate. They were still, head bowed, holding what looked like a hymnal. I thought perhaps it was a caroler from one of the town's holiday events. But there was no music, no movement, just stillness. The figure stood there for what felt like an eternity, framed by the swirling snow under the dim porch light. I waited, expecting them to approach or move along, but they didn't. Uneasy, I drew the curtains and tried to shake off the strange encounter. The next night, I looked outside again, more out of nervous curiosity than anything else. The caroler was back, standing in the same spot. They still didn't sing. This time, I noticed their coat was old and worn, edges frayed and stiff from the cold. Their head remained down as if reading from the hymnal, though the snow should have soaked its pages by now. I told myself it was just a townsperson playing some weird seasonal prank. I even considered walking out to say something, but something about the way they stood, so perfectly still, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the icy wind. By the third night, the caroler was closer. They now stood just beyond the front walk, leaving behind muddy, slushy footprints that marred the otherwise pristine snow. My breath hitched when I saw those tracks. There hadn't been any the nights before. It was as though they had simply appeared, bypassing the snow-covered ground entirely. The footprints weren't just from boots either. They were uneven, like something had dragged through the snow. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house felt amplified: the groan of the old wooden floors, the creak of the wind against the shutters. I kept imagining that caroler standing silently outside, just watching, head lowered, unmoving. By Christmas Eve, my nerves were frayed. I woke early to fresh snow covering the yard. I rushed to the window, half hoping the night's snowfall had erased all traces of the eerie visitor. But there they were, standing even closer just at the foot of my porch steps. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Grabbing my coat, boots, and flashlight, I stepped outside. The wind bit at my face, and the snow crunched beneath my feet as I followed the strange, muddy footprints leading from my porch. They stretched across the yard and into the woods beyond my home. The deeper I went into the woods, the more disturbed the trail became. Broken branches, scattered leaves, and shredded paper littered the forest floor. I bent down and picked up a piece of the paper. It was brittle and yellowed like it had been there for decades. Further ahead, something red caught my eye. A scarf tattered, stained, and torn lay tangled in the underbrush. It looked old. Its once bright color faded to a dull crimson. As I reached for it, something crunched beneath my boot. I looked down and saw a photograph worn and cracked with age. My breath caught in my throat. It was an old black and white photo of my grandfather, standing proudly in front of his childhood home, holding a familiar HYM. It was Christmas morning, and the house was filled with the quiet hum of holiday cheer. The smell of cinnamon and pine drifted through the air, mingling with the crackling warmth of the fireplace. But despite the festive atmosphere, there was something that unsettled me, something I couldn't quite place. The porcelain doll, the one I had found tucked away in an old box in the attic, sat on the shelf in the living room. Its single glass eye glinted in the morning light, catching my gaze every time I passed. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the sunlight, playing tricks on my eyes. I had no reason to feel uneasy. But as I went about my Christmas morning routine, putting up decorations, wrapping gifts, and preparing a feast, the sense of unease lingered. It wasn't just the doll. There was a strange smell in the air, faint but unmistakable. It was a musty, decaying scent that I could never quite place. It followed me through every room, no matter where I went. It wasn't overpowering, not yet, but there was something about it that felt wrong, like something old, forgotten, and best left undisturbed. The day passed slowly, but by evening, the house had taken on a different tone. The warmth of the fireplace couldn't shake the chill that clung to the air. I found myself pulling my sweater tighter around my shoulders, even though the heater was running fine. The air felt damp, heavy, like something was pressing in from all sides. Nightfall came, and with it, an oppressive silence. As I climbed into bed, the cold seemed to seep deeper into my bones. I wrapped the blankets tightly around me, hoping for warmth and rest. But sleep was elusive, interrupted by strange, restless dreams. I saw dark forests and twisted trees with roots that seemed to claw their way up from the earth. Something was following me in the woods, something I couldn't see but could feel just behind me, lurking. I woke with a start, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was still, too still. The air was thick with silence, the kind that presses down on you, making it hard to breathe. My eyes darted around the room, but I saw nothing. I strained my ears, listening for anything, any sound that might explain the unease I felt. Then I heard it, a faint, muffled scratching sound, coming from somewhere beneath the floorboards. My blood ran cold as I listened, my breath catching in my throat. The scratching was slow but deliberate, like something small dragging itself across the wood, its movements jerky and uncertain. It came again, a soft but steady scraping, like something trapped just below the surface of the floor. My mind raced. What could it be? A rat? A mouse? No, it didn't sound like that. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I hesitated, then grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand. My hands were trembling as I crept down the hallway, the house seeming to groan and creak around me. With every step, the scent of decay grew stronger, filling my nostrils, thick and suffocating. I reached the living room and stopped. The floorboards near the fireplace were slightly warped, bulging upward as if something was pushing against them from below. The scratching had grown louder, more frantic, as though whatever it was beneath the floor was desperate to escape. Swallowing my fear, I took a step forward, my eyes scanning the room. It was then that I noticed the shelf near the back door. The porcelain doll, which I had left there earlier that morning, was gone. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't touched it since I'd set it down, so how could it have moved? Before I could react, the scratching stopped, and the house fell into an even deeper silence. It felt wrong, like the kind of silence you hear just before something terrible happens. Then, just as I thought I might catch my breath, I heard it. A soft, deliberate tapping. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from behind me. Slowly, I turned, flashlight in hand, and pointed it toward the window. The twisted branches of the old cedar tree outside swayed in the winds, casting long, jagged shadows across the yard. But it wasn't the tree that caught my eye, it was what lay beneath it. The porcelain doll, its cracked face staring up at me, lay half buried in the fresh snow. Its single glass eye glistened in the beam of the flashlight, but the other eye, the one that had been missing earlier, was back, and it was staring directly at me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. My hand shook as I reached for the door, but the room felt heavy, like the air itself was trying to hold me in place. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the doll. Its empty, lifeless gaze held me captive as I backed away, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The house with a single red light. There was a house at the end of our street that had always intrigued me. It wasn't beautiful, nor was it old in any significant way, but it always felt different. Every Christmas season, a single red light would glow from the front window. No wreath, no garlands, no other decorations, just that one red bulb flickering softly in the dark. As children, we spun stories about the house. Some said it was haunted. Others claimed an old recluse lived there, one who hated company. Our parents brushed off our stories, saying the place was just abandoned. But we never dared to get too close, especially not after dark. Years passed, and I moved away. Life carried me to new places, new experiences, and I forgot all about the house. Until last December, when I returned home for the holidays. I drove down the familiar street, and there it was. The same house, unchanged. The peeling paint, the sagging porch, and the one red light that blinked steadily from the window. It was nostalgic in a way, but it also stirred something in me, something I couldn't quite place. A lingering unease, a feeling that the house wasn't just forgotten, but hiding something. That night, as I sat at my parents' kitchen table, I glanced out the window. And that's when I saw it just for a moment. A face, pale and indistinct, barely visible behind the glass. I thought I was imagining things, so I shook it off, attributing it to the dimming light and the creeping feeling of nostalgia. But every night after that, I couldn't help but look back in my rearview mirror as I passed the house. And each time, that face was there, clearer than before, its hollow eyes locked on me. On a particularly snowy evening, I couldn't resist. I parked my car a few houses down and walked toward the house, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The air was still, almost suffocating in its silence. I approached the steps, my breath fogging in front of me, and stopped just short of the door. The red bulb glowed faintly in the window, casting long, eerie shadows across the yard. I peered inside. The house was dimly lit, as if no one had lived there in years. The furniture was covered in dust, and old holiday cards lined the shelves, curling at the edges with age. But it was the face that caught my attention. It was there, but not in the window. It was reflected in a tarnished mirror hanging on the wall inside. Its eyes were wide and dark, fixed directly on me. My heart raced. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my legs refused to move. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by the intensity of that gaze. The front door creaked open, just an inch, but enough to send a chill down my spine. A draft of cold air seeped out, bringing with it the smell of wet wood and mildew. I stepped back, slipping on the icy stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The door didn't open further, nor did it close. It just stayed there, inviting me in. I turned and ran, stumbling through the snow, my pulse pounding in my ears. By the time I reached my car, I convinced myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light, an old, forgotten house playing on childhood fears. But later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic glow pulsed from the living room, steady as a heartbeat. I crept downstairs, my chest tight with dread, and stopped at the doorway. There, on the table near the front window, was the red bulb, and in the reflection of the window's glass, I saw it. The face, staring back at me, waiting